Logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are problems with logic. So what we'll look at are the names of the fallacies. You may be familiar with some of these. You may have heard of the bandwagon fallacy or the straw man fallacy. I'll explain these in detail. You can come back and watch this presentation as often as you need to for your own reference, or you can simply take notes throughout as you will be applying these fallacies to some puzzlers, shall we say, later on in the coursework. And I will be asking you to identify a fallacy in the next project. I will go over about 20 fallacies today. You probably will have a pretty strong understanding of maybe 3 or 4 of these at the end of this PowerPoint, and that's okay. It's a great deal of information that I'm presenting to you, and I think that if you can apply 2, 3, 4 of these, you're doing well. Okay. That being said, let's take a look at one of the most common fallacies. This is the hasty generalization. It's simply too small of a sample. For example, you and your friend are eating lunch. You're both talking about your psychology courses. You're taking 2 different psychology courses. You both found them to be extremely difficult. A hasty generalization fallacy would be to then say all psychology courses are difficult. And you are taking 2 courses in a college that offers dozens of courses in psychology and a region that has tens of colleges that offer hundreds of psychology courses, in a state that has hundreds of colleges that offer thousands of courses, in the United States, and so on and so forth. Too small sample. The most rational thing that you can say, the most logical thing that you can say, is some psychology courses are difficult. Usually when you're using a superlative like all or every, then you are in illogical territory. Okay. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc, means after this, therefore, because of this. This is also known as correlation does not equal causation. So, I walk under a ladder. I see a black cat cross my path. And later in the day, I slip on some ice and I sprain my ankle. Just because I did these unlucky things, had these unlucky things happen to me, does not mean that the superstitions are the cause of my accident. Quite obviously, it was probably, most likely, the ice and my inattentiveness. So, just because something happens after something else doesn't mean it happened as a result of something else. We can say the crime rate went up after President Jones raised taxes. That doesn't necessarily mean that the increased taxes caused the crime rate to increase. And if they did, we would have to show a great deal of evidence to connect the two other than simply sequence. Okay, that's a little more complex. The slippery slope. This is one that we see very often, and one that we are probably something that we obviously do to ourselves emotionally, I think. So, for example, you've just submitted your first project for English 101. It's possible that some of you may have failed this first project. Now, if you failed this project, you're taking a step in one direction that's a bad direction. That's going to inevitably lead to your ruination. So, what we say to ourselves is, well, if I failed the first project in English 101, I'm probably going to fail all the projects in English 101. And if I fail all of the projects in English 101, I'm probably going to fail all of my courses. And if I fail all of my courses, my dad, I know he's been taking his medicine, but he has not made those lifestyle changes. He's probably going to have a stroke when he hears that I've failed all of my courses. My mom is going to have to spoon feed my dad because I failed my first project in English 101. Does that make sense? No, it does not make sense. And yet we do it to ourselves all of the time. You break up with your boyfriend. No one will ever love me again. You're in the pit of despair. It's illogical. Okay, weak analogy. So this is an incongruous comparison. You are being completely logical if you say to your parents, do not compare me with my perfect sister. Do not compare me with my brother who always gets good grades. I am not my brother. I don't have the same gifts. I don't have the same talents. It is a weak analogy. That's logical. It really is. So we have to be careful about making apt comparisons and not making apple to orange comparison. Yes, they're both fruit, but that's not enough of there's not enough similarities there other than the fact that they're in the fruit family. So we want to look at things that have more than one similarity when we're making analogies. We want to make sure that that those are appropriate. Okay. Your mom was right when she said to you, you said, Mom, everyone else has an iPhone. Can I please get an iPhone? And she said, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? She was right. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't make it right. So add populum, you can hear the popular in there, and the bandwagon fallacy. Look at this. I mean, it's a band. It's on wagon. Why wouldn't you want to jump on board? It looks like so much fun. Everyone else would. It's crowded. Look at all those people. So, you know, the fallacy of the majority here, and that can be anywhere from peer pressure to what is often called mobocracy. That is 100, as Thomas Jefferson said, 173 despots are as bad as one. So beware. Here's one that we'll see during the political campaigns quite frequently. Ad hominem translates as against the man, and to quoque is essentially in you too. The to quoque is a little bit more sophisticated than simply back at you, and I'll get into that. In the case of against the man, what you have to be careful with is that during the political campaigns, for instance, instead of criticizing someone's policies and their characteristics or traits that are directly related to their competency in a position, they may be attacked for their personality traits or their physical attributes, that sort of thing. So it's simply attacking a person instead of really logically looking at their policies. And then for two quoque, and people will say, oh, well, you're this political person is a flip-flopper. They've had this position 10 years ago, and now they have a completely different position. Much can change in 10 years. Evidence, circumstances, context. So, for example, if you started to smoke cigarettes, and you know that your mother smoked 20 years ago, and you say to your mother, well, you can't fault me for smoking because you used to smoke 20 years ago. The problem there is that smoking has not become healthy for you in the past 20 years. So you're not really addressing the main concern with smoking. You're just saying, well, and you did it too, so how can you say anything? So there's those elements of tu quoque that on one hand, time may not have any impact on, say, the health effects of nicotine. And on the other hand, the context, the historical context, could make all the difference. Okay. This is a false premise. You're off to a bad start. So your argument may follow logically and may come to a good conclusion, but your initial premise is wrong. So in the classic example, all dogs are immortal. Socrates is not a dog. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Obviously, the correct conclusion, good process in terms of the logic, but it began with a statement that simply, unfortunately, is not true. Okay. This is the opposite problem, and this can be a very dangerous fallacy. Missing the point. They draw you in with good evidence. So they'll say, drunk driving is a serious crime, and the people can die. And the punishment should match the severity of the crime. Therefore, anyone who is found guilty of a drunk driving violation should be put to the death penalty. You have an Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob's a little, he's kind of the black sheep of the family. He's well-intentioned, but he doesn't always make the best choices. Uncle Bob, he's gone to the Steeler game, had a couple beers, he comes out, he's slightly over the legal limit. He hasn't done any damage, but he just went through a stop sign at 20 miles an hour, and he was pulled over by the police. They give him a breathalyzer, he's slightly over the legal limit, and now, goodbye, Uncle Bob. Do you see the problem here? They had you convinced, very logically, the punishment should fit the crime, people can die, and then they've taken it to the extreme. Everyone, on all circumstances, even in slightly more benign cases, and of course it could have ended fatally. It is not a good situation, but your Uncle Bob, who's slightly over the legal limit, who just went through a stop sign at 20 miles an hour, should be put to death? This is a really dangerous one, because they will lead you down the garden path with good logic, and before you know it, you're nodding along, and you're agreeing with something that may be, who knows, slightly fascist or immoral. So just be careful. Oh, here we go again. Okay, so this one is the straw man fallacy. Not an easy one to explain, but let's say you had been arbitrarily assigned debate topics in your course, in your history course or something, and you've drawn the short straw. You keep thinking to yourself, oh, if I had the other side of this debate, I could argue it so well. The other side is so much stronger. How do you address this? Logically, do you say, I'm just going to pretend like their argument isn't really that strong? I'm going to pretend like their argument that 6'2", 225 pounds solid muscle is really just a flimsy little straw man that I can tear apart? You shouldn't do that. Everybody knows it's a strong argument. You're just making yourself look foolish. The best thing that you can do is to acknowledge that they have a strong argument and say, yes, I know. My opponent's argument is 6'2", 225 pounds. Everybody knows that. But what I want to address, and what most people don't know, is that he has an Achilles heel. And that's what I'm going to address. This one weakness that nobody else sees, but it's there. And that's a much more logical way of dealing with it. In this instance, one of the easiest ways for people to diminish the notion of creationism is that, to make us seem as if we are anti-intellectual, because we believe in a God that has designed us and our world. And it's a strong argument. And to deny that is a fallacy on their part, and one that's quite obviously easily refuted. Okay. Many of us like murder mystery shows or Agatha Christie novels, and they do tend to have a formula. Usually in the beginning, quite understated, very quietly, the real murderer comes in. And then we are introduced to our first red herring. The wife has been found, in the drawing room, killed with a candlestick or what have you. And so we think we get to meet the husband, and the husband was very angry and was having an affair, and so we think, oh, it has to be the husband. Oh, he didn't care about her. But then he has a solid alibi. It's not the husband. Oh, wait, there's a will. And when she died, all of her money was going to go to her sister, and the sister never loved her. Ah, it's the sister, we know it. But then the sister has an alibi. What is going on? Why can we never figure these out? Oh, wait a minute. And then when Poirot comes in, or Miss Marple, and explains it all, quite obviously, right there from the beginning, under everybody's nose, quietly serving everybody, almost unseen like a good servant, the butler did it. So the red herrings are the tangents. They're the diversionary tactics to get us to avoid the real killer, the real issue. And we will do this ourselves. We will employ the red herring fallacy. We're at a family gathering, and people are talking about a political or a cultural event that we are underinformed on. But we've just learned something similar to this subject in our coursework at college, and we want to demonstrate our knowledge. So we're just going to hijack that conversation and take it on our tangent, because then we can talk about what we understand, even though it's not really related to what everybody else was talking about. Or we see people who are politicians, they come on a daily talk show, and the reporter asks them pointed questions about something controversial. They don't want to answer those questions. They want to stick to their talking points. So they use the red herring fallacy to hijack that response and to not answer the question, and to instead talk about the issues on which they feel comfortable. So, red herring. Okay, false dichotomy. suggesting that there are only two options when obviously more than two options exist. I love this. When my kids were young, they were maybe 3, 4 years old. We'd go to a restaurant. Instead of making the beleaguered waitress stand there while I read through all of the menu options, I would say to them, do you want the pasta or the burger? I would say, do you want your bath before we read your story or after we read your story? Would you like peas or green beans with dinner? That worked for a time, and then it became more sophisticated. And it became, well, don't they have chicken fingers? I don't want a bath. Oh, you realize that there's a third option here. Okay, so, let me go to another fallacy, which is appeal to force. And in this case, I think it's important that you don't let somebody treat you like a 2-year-old. Don't let them say that there are only two options when there are obviously many more. Okay. Genetic fallacy. The origin of a person, place, or thing does not necessarily determine its current value. So the VW bug was designed by Nazis. Does this mean that if you purchase a 2016 Volkswagen Bug that you are a Nazi sympathizer? No. Not even if you derive small sadistic pleasure in knowing that people are punching each other as you drive by. You grew up in a poor neighborhood. Does that mean that you are going to live as a poor person for the rest of your life? No, of course not. So the origin does not determine its current value. Okay, now I have this listed as all of the appeals. These are broken down as appeal to pity, appeal to force, appeal to authority, appeal to tradition, and appeal to ignorance. So, many of you may not remember Mr. T. He was a big figure when I was growing up, and he had a slogan, I pity the fool. And so he was on the A team. So he's on my A team, my appeals team here. So pity is a good pathos appeal. It's a good emotional appeal. But it's not necessarily logical, because you're pleading for special circumstances. And that's a justice issue. To say, well, my life is more challenging than other people's lives, so you should pity me. And so that's a problem. Emotionally it can be effective, but logically not so much. Appeal to force. Do this or else. So if you are a manager, probably not the most logical way of dealing with your employees. You increase your sales by 12% or I'll fire you. It's a little evil. Okay, and hence our character here from Lord of the Rings. Okay, Lord of the Rings. And so in the center here, appeal to authority. You think that would be good as long as it's an authority on the subject. Unfortunately, sometimes we have an authority, but it's an authority to the wrong subject. So in this case here in the center, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV, right? Not exactly an authority. And then in the bottom corner, one of my favorite characters of all time from Fiddler on the Roof, Tavia. And he sang a song over and over again in this musical called Tradition. And he held strongly to his family's traditions, to his religious traditions. And as a parent of teenage girls, those traditions were compromised over and over and over again. And he has some very intense and very entertaining conversations with God about it. So to say simply that we've always done something, this is the way that we've always done it, may have strong emotional appeal, but doesn't mean that it's right. So, for example, there's a village in China where women were suffering from osteoporosis, crippling. They were all hunched over. And they kept coming into this clinic and they were trying to deal with this, and they were wondering what it could possibly be. Their diet, their environment was causing these terrible conditions, genetics. So one of the doctors took a team and we went into the village, and after observing them for a short period of time, it became obvious that the cause of this was that they traditionally swept out their huts with short-handled brooms. So the tradition of the short-handled broom had to be changed, and that created a much better outcome for these women as they aged. So just because they had always done it that way, it didn't mean it was a good thing to do. Okay. And then finally, appeal to ignorance. This is not when you're appealing to people who are underinformed or you're appealing to ignorant people. What it means is that nobody knows the answer, so take my word for it. Now, oftentimes, nobody knows the answer is in itself a fallacy. Here's one where I'm just saying, oh, well, nobody knows if there's life in outer space, but, I was camping in New Mexico, and I saw some things in the sky, and trust me, I'm telling you, there are things out there. Right? Okay. Nobody knows. Take my word for it. Appeal to ignorance. Okay. Just a few more. The fallacy of division, also known as the part-to-whole fallacy. Gotta love little kids. Little kids will often say things like, oh, you got a blue car? Does that mean the engine's blue and the steering wheel's blue and the seats are blue? They just assume that because part of it, the part that they can see is blue, all of it is blue. So, for example, somebody may say, well, that group of people that you hang out with, they're a bunch of criminals. That means that you're a criminal too. Or, I've met your family. Your whole family's weird. You must be weird too. And so, again, fallacy. Begging the question. So, this is also known as circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is when somebody simply restates their thesis in different terms, and they don't give you any information. So it begs the question, why? Because you're telling me your thesis over again, but you're not giving me any evidence. So in this case, you can see active euthanasia is exactly the same thing as helping another human being escape suffering through death. That is essentially its definition. To say something is morally acceptable is the equivalent of saying a decent ethical thing. So they're saying the same thing over and over again, but they're not telling you why. Okay, this is your thesis. Why would you say that? You have given me no reason. So that is a fallacy. We're back to our grammatical fallacy, also known as grandma in the baby carriage. Yes, I'm sure you've seen the t-shirts or the memes. Let's eat grandma, and then let's eat, comma, grandma. Punctuation saves lives. So, yes, context and punctuation, it's that important. Okay. Equivocation. This is when you use a word in two different contexts to try to evoke the same meaning. Or maybe you're using a word that has many connotations and you're inserting your own connotation, assuming everyone else is going to view it the same way. So in this case, it says, it is only right to give our money to charity. Therefore, charities have a right to our money. In the first usage, right means correct. It is only correct to give our money to charity. Therefore, charities have an entitlement to our money. And yet, they're using it in a way that equivocates the term, that in both instances it's correct. That's the insinuation. That's equivocation. They're equivocating it. Be wary when people use big words like freedom, love, friendship. These concepts have many connotations. You can avoid the equivocation fallacy by being very clear. When I say freedom, I mean this. In this context, I'm saying justice, and this is what I mean by justice. I mean love in terms of agape love, or whatever particular definition of love that you're using in that context. So being clear with our definitions. And finally, our last slide is non sequitur. It's also a wonderful cartoon. It simply means it doesn't follow. It's a much more sophisticated way of saying random. So people generally like to walk on the beach. Beaches have sand. Therefore, having sand floors in homes would be a great idea. Does that necessarily follow? It's probably not taking into account many things. If you have a cat, this is obviously unsanitary. And probably, generally speaking, it's unsanitary. I think you could pretty much kill any sweeper, because all of this would be taken into different rooms, and it's a fun concept, but probably not very practical. So those are all of your fallacies. Again, you can come back and watch this wonderful presentation at any time, but probably it would be much simpler for you just to refer to your notes on this as we move forward. Okay.